Awesome.
And we are live on the Gamification Revolution. Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Gabe Zickerman. I'm coming to you from a sunny, which is surprising, but sunny Amsterdam, as I'm getting ready to do the keynote for tomorrow's, the next web conference. And I'm joined by Salih Mujcic from Revelian, who's joining us from Brisbane in Australia. Hello, Salih.
Hi, everyone. Hi, how you going?
I'm going so well. So that's always one of my favorite Australian sayings because to us, it actually doesn't make any sense. Like I want to say by
Yes,
bus in response to that
sure,
every
sure.
time you
How are
guys
you
say it. Yes. Oh, thank you so much. I'm doing really
doing?
great. And you guys, I'm so happy to have you here. It's nice to see all of our regular chatters, Lori and David. Hello. This is it's really, really exciting to have you here, and all the rest of you who've joined us. For those of you who are here live, and it's your first time on Gamification Revolution, you need to log in with one of your social media accounts so that you can ask us questions. And we're here at your disposal for the next half an hour or so. You can ask Sally questions or myself questions about anything that you want to talk about. You just fill in that question box and you're good to go, but first you got to log in. And if you're joining us as a replay or on the podcast, welcome. Try to be with us if you can Thursdays at 1 o'clock Eastern for the regular event. Okay, so Sally, tell us a little bit about Theme Park Hero, which is this application that for which you're.
Sure. So Theme Park Hero is a game-based assessment that uses some of the latest technology to help organizations find and pinpoint high potential talent in their recruitment and selection processes. So in terms of some of the background, and I'm sure we'll explore this a little bit later on, it's a move or the next evolution in psychometric assessments from sort of web-based Q&A type assessments to a game-based environment.
So those assessments, all of us have taken them at one time or another, either in school or on the job. Those assessments normally suck. And to wit, a lot of them are like, we're filling out a little form and we kind of all know the answers to the questions. Like I remember one from an early job where it was like, if you come across money that you're left over in the till, what do you do with it at the end of the day? So what are some of the objectives? And we all know that that's ridiculous because we all know what to say, like don't steal, right? So what are the unique things that a game-based assessment brings to psychometric assessments that aren't in those normal forms?
Sure. Look, to be honest, if we go a step back and we look at the historical advancements of psychometric assessments, you're right. There's probably a very strong tradition of assessment or for different types of purposes. For example, the education system, pre-employment screening. That was really kicked off during the sort of World War eras, and the US and the UK certainly have a strong history of large-scale testing. Since then, and it was paper-based, so exactly like you described, you'd fill in a form, you'd have a number of questions, and I think what that does is that it brings up a lot of anxiety because people generally don't like to be tested, and when you say test, they think of school or some sort of anxiety-provoking experience. Since the sort of 1940s or the early sort of that sort of period, a lot really hasn't changed. We've moved from paper and pencil assessments to computerized tests to web-enabled assessments. So the user experience has not really evolved instead with the pace of technology advancements. So what game-based assessments do is that they bring this kind of digitally rich and immersive experience for candidates and people going through assessments. So that whole stigma and anxiety that people feel completing a regular assessment is dropped, and that's a big benefit. But there's also a range of other benefits that come with it. So, for example, games and game-based assessments go hand in hand with big data. So we get a much richer and more complex picture of the candidate that we can elicit in a very short period of time. And you were absolutely right, Gabe. It's hard to tell what it is that employers might be testing as opposed to a paper and pencil assessment where it says, would you take money from the till? Well, most people will generally say no, but it's actually surprising how many people will actually also say yes when you look at the stats in the background.
Well, let me ask you this question, because we had Guy Halftek on from NAC not that long ago. And so one of the things that he said about the NAC platform is that it's actually the results of psychometric testing in a game context are more accurate, or they're more real, or they're deeper. Can you comment on that? Do you guys know, do we know that that's true? Is that just something we think is true? Do you even believe that's true?
So you've just dropped out some of those critical moments there, Gabe.
I would say the question is, are the results of psychometric testing in games more real or more accurate than the paper-based tests?
Well, I think the jury is still out. I think one of the things that psychometricians and psychologists generally fascinated by is this kind of area of equivalence and validity, which basically means, does this tool, when I use it in a pre-employment screening, actually predict performance on the job? There are tools that are better than others. So if we talk about measuring things like cognitive ability, or your ability to process different types of information of differing levels of complexity, there's a large body of research that suggests that they're very effective in predicting who's going to be performing well on the job. So there are some very good kind of traditional psychometric tests that can predict performance. However, they do have some drawbacks in terms of that user experience that we just spoke about before. So I think it's kind of like, I think to sort of say that they're not as accurate is a little. I think there's different purposes. Some companies will love game-based assessments and gamified experiences. Others, for those maybe more senior positions where they need this kind of air of seriousness, and it needs to be seen as a very serious process, they might opt for traditional tests. But game-based assessments and psychometric assessments, I think, go hand in hand, and depending on the validity and the psychometric qualities, some of them will be better than others.
Well, so it's interesting because the military does a fair amount of game-based testing in the sense of putting people in context, right, and asking them to perform in that context. What kinds of things do you test in Theme Park Hero? What are you actually testing for? Yeah,
sure. So we've got 4 different games within there. So this game has been designed for the graduate market. So if you've seen some of the collateral we have online, or some of the videos or images, you'll see that it's a very kind of fun design. It's got some very kind of cool imagery, and it's got that whole kind of game experience. So it's targeting some of those entry-level jobs where that kind of generation is really open and really kind of responsive to those types of approaches. The kinds of games that we have in there are really based on some sort of traditional psychometric testing models. There is a game in there where you have to manipulate some shapes and rebuild a circuit board to make sure that a roller coaster gets back in action. And what you have to do is you follow this kind of blueprint, and then have to rearrange the pieces to make it all fit together. So there's a roller coaster game. There's a game where you're building and creating water parks. So you're designing them for architects. And it's using kind of Tetris-like shapes and fitting them into different shaped spaces. We have a game where you have to pop different types of colored balloons depending on what instructions you're given. And then there's a final game where you play this kind of arcade sort of game where you've got 2 sides, and they've got different types of tokens on each side with multipliers, and you have to quickly work out which side has more value. So on the surface, it seems just like a regular game you might play, from the iStore or iTunes or whatever it is, or on Facebook. But underneath that, we're measuring some very kind of important psychological constructs. Things like mental agility. How quickly can you adjust to different types of rules that come up within the game, and how do you react to those changes that occur? And they might be explicit or implicit. What's your cognitive speed and processing like under mental load? So when we introduce different types of concepts in and that are coming at you, how do you actually deal and process that? Do you process that in a timely manner? What's your attention like? Can you actually follow certain types of rules and then ignore distractors? Your numerical processing ability and your spatial aptitude. How can you rotate shapes, 2D shapes in space? And what these do, and what we're trying to measure here is, I suppose, underlying cognitive processes to understand what someone's mental capacity is like, because they may play these games and they may look like games, but everyone's using these types of processes to solve problems at work, essentially.
So, have you given any thought to the idea of more complicated kinds of tests or trying to investigate functions which might be more specific to specific jobs? Because it seems like that this is testing kind of general skills.
Yeah. So I think you mentioned before sort of the army using sort of games to test for specific skills. And so there is a lot of, so there are simulations out there, but it becomes very expensive to make specific games that are targeting specific jobs. I'm sure if you're a large organization and you wanted to create a simulation for a specific job, you could go ahead and do that. But what makes it, I suppose, really difficult is that if the job changes over time or something happens, you then have to alter that experience to match those types of changes that are required, that are met by those job requirements. So testing a general set of capabilities or abilities makes it a much more economic and safer approach, if you like, or a better approach to testing some of these different types of abilities.
Well, I guess what I mean is more like for example, let's say we wanted to test like fast food workers,
Oh,
right?
sure.
I mean, if you made a game in which you're, doing a kind of Diner Dashy, I've always asserted that games like Diner Dash actually are kind of simulations of what it's like to really work in a restaurant. They operate on, this idea of having to clear tables and, pick up bills and try to optimize and be as fast as possible to do those sorts of things. Have you guys thought about or been approached to extend it in that kind of way? Because there seem to be some categories where some kinds of simulation games might make more
For sure.
sense. Was that not really interesting?
No, for sure. That's very interesting. We have been approached by a number of different organizations saying to us, hey, we love Theme Park Hero and we love game-based testing, but we want something that's uniquely ours. So we can actually present a very positive brand of innovation and something that specifically relates to our types of jobs. Now, that's a very interesting approach in itself, and I think it's got a lot of merit, because when we launched Theme Park Hero, even people or organizations who weren't in the theme park industry saw a lot of I suppose consistency what they were offering. So we've had a number of different offers from organizations to say, hey, we'd like you to do this for us and do it in that way. I think theming for organizations is really cool, and like we get into this concept of what psychologists like to call face validity. What it is that I'm being asked to do, is it relevant to the kind of job that I'll be applying for? And that has a lot of power, because when candidates go through that, they feel a sense of relevance, like it actually applies to their job. So that is a very important concept. So on the other side, if we're asking someone to apply for a job in a bank, for example, and they're serving dishes in some sort of restaurant, as you mentioned, like for example Diner Dash, they might have an aversive reaction to that and say, what does this actually have to do with the job that I'm applying for? So it's a fine balance, and we have to find that balance in terms of making something that applies generally, and we take candidates' perspectives into consideration.
Oh, that's interesting. I want to come back to that, and Lori's got a question queued up, but because you mentioned it a couple of times, what is the situation with the theme? I mean, of all the possible themes that you could have chosen, a theme park feels very gamey to begin with. So I'm kind of curious to understand the history of that and what the plans are. How do you deal with the tension between a serious analytics tool that seemed like a theme park, and and the question of testing people for more serious games.
Yeah, well, to give you some background, we had a very awesome team work on this. So we started with 5 individuals. There was an instructional designer, a couple of psychologists, there was a software engineer, and myself. And we were given the task that is basically build a game that is psychometrically valid. And there is no kind of manual for this, Gabe. There is nothing out there that kind of you can follow and say, how do we actually go about building this? I know a lot of the people at Glass Labs, so EA Games, along with Microsoft, are trying to deal with this challenge right now, and they're looking more from the educational kind of side of things in terms of how you actually develop a game-based test. But there is nothing out there that you can kind of lean on and look at. So when we first started, we were given this challenge, and we kind of thought, well, what do we actually do? What do we want this to be? Our main kind of purpose was to provide clients or organizations with meaningful data so they can make better hiring decisions. And that was the objective. Now, on the other side, because we sit in a very kind of delicate position between providing value and meaning to clients, but also caring a lot about candidate reactions and perspectives, making sure that they feel like they're going through a meaningful process as well. We came into the whole kind of like, well, how do we do this? Gamification adds a lot of immersion, engagement, fun to processes. How do we use this? And so going back to the theme, we had a lot of different themes. We wanted to make something that was fun, so you could do things that were out of the ordinary and you didn't have to complete your regular type tasks. So that was one of the main considerations. Other themes that we threw up were things like, Adventure Island, kind of medieval kind of experience, and we settled on theme park because it gave us a lot of kind of different breadth in terms of what we could do and the different types of concepts we could explore.
Well, I think probably everybody's glad that you didn't do baby delivery hero as the context, or diaper changing hero as the context. So Lori's been very patient, and she, by the way, Lori is really into the HR subject, and she likes the theme of a theme park. So you've got one vote in favor of the theme park. But her question is whether or not the assessments are a good way to identify high performance employees. Can you use the theme park hero platform for people who are already in the job and to kind of separate that? And have we had any results back or success stories about that yet?
Sure. So on the other side of the game, we also have a benchmarking facility. So what we can do is come into your organization and benchmark a cross-section of your employees and really understand what it is that makes up your cohort and what are some of those differences that will make you pick a successful candidate. So that whole flip side of getting a company profile is really important. And I think when Revelian started in 1999, that was one of the things that this company actually launched, was dual-sided assessments. So with all of our tools, we have the ability to actually create benchmarks for organizations, and Theme Park Hero is no different. So we can actually do that and provide some of those specific characteristics that are going to make candidates more successful in different organizations.
So so you're saying that do you tell the candidate also how they did? Do they get any real-time feedback, or does the data just go into the pool behind, and then at the end you're like, see ya?
Yeah, that's a really important point. So when we talk about psychometric and assessment design, one of the key considerations is how much feedback you actually give candidates, because it can actually have a psychological impact on how they perform. So typically psychometricians and psychologists, when it comes to assessment design, can be on the conservative side in terms of designing some of these assessments. When we think about games, they are rich with feedback. They're rich with mini success points. As soon as you complete a task or you complete some sort of activity, you're provided feedback in terms of how you're going. And this is one of the most important parts of engaging, I suppose, players in those different types of activities that they're completing. So we have, I suppose, two mentalities almost on the opposite side of the spectrum. we've made a lot of compromise in terms of reaching a middle ground that is ethical, but also provides candidates with those little mini win stories. So, for example, we have combo counts for a balloon game where they have to pop different types of balloons. And if they get them right in order and they keep getting them right, we tell them things like, you're on fire, you're awesome, well done. So we do provide real-time feedback in terms of while candidates are completing the game-based assessment, because it is different to a traditional assessment. They need to feel that sense of immersion, they need to feel that sense of engagement, and like they're actually doing something, which is really different to a traditional assessment. You'll provide your responses and then you'll submit, and that will be it. And then if you're lucky, you'll get a feedback report which tells you how you performed. And we actually do send those out for traditional assessments, but nothing happens in real time, which is kind of this sort of vacuous state for candidates. And games are awesome at that because they provide that.
Right, and I'm actually interested in the logic of why a company wouldn't want the candidate to get a lot of positive feedback, because aren't you interested in seeing the highs, not just the kind of midpoint? Like, under the best possible scenario, what can this person do?
I've missed that, but I'll try to answer that question because I think I know what you asked. We have to be careful in terms of if someone's performing really badly, for example, on the assessment, if we in any way indicate that they're performing badly, that might impact how they perform on subsequent games or experiences. If we tell them that they're doing really, really well, and they're doing exceptionally well, and we can do that, and for some reason they don't perform well on other aspects of the game, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. We have to be really mindful in terms of the feedback that we do provide.
So Laura's got another question. We have a couple more queued up, and this one is about where are your clients more interested in? Are you seeing more interest in the pre-hiring or the kind of assessment of existing employees? And can you talk a little bit about where you think the market is going in terms of the use of game-based assessments in HR?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the interest is actually in the pre-employment scene. And particularly in graduate programs. Now, graduate programs exist in this kind of unique bubble where I suppose organizations are a little bit more less conservative, if you like, in terms of trying out innovative approaches in terms of recruitment. And if we look at where that's been applied, for example, America's Army, Siemens Plantville, My Marriott Hotel, a bunch of these different types of game-based approaches, particularly in attraction, where they're trying to send out a signal about what their innovation is like, what the company...
Being cool.
Yeah, exactly, because they're trying to attract the best talent to improve their pipeline. We're seeing a lot of that in graduate recruitment, and specifically in pre-employment. So typically where we see it is in attraction. It's very rare, and there's probably 4 companies around the world, and you already mentioned NAC, that currently actually provide selection or gamified assessments. Because it's very difficult to do and to do right, because it relies on a lot of emerging cloud-based technologies. You've got a lot of data streaming through as people are playing games. You have to know how to actually treat that data, understand how to get the best out of it, otherwise it just becomes noise. So a lot of the application is actually in the pre-employment scene. In terms of development, there's a long-standing history of serious games and game-based approaches in learning and development in terms of once employees get on the job. There's a lot of companies out there that do that in terms of providing some rich and engaging experiences for once employees are on the job. And that's been established for a very long time. Some of the latest approaches on that scene, for example, work.com, where we're getting performance management in real time, Badgeville and Achievers for recognition in terms of performance, things like Culture Amp, where we've got real-time assessments of organizational culture. So on the job, there's a very established scene for employees. In terms of pre-employment, because of some of the difficulties in terms of creating a game-based assessment, it's not as prevalent. But in terms of the future, where I see this going is that game-based assessments will take over from web-based assessments because they provide a much more engaging and richer experience for candidates. You touched on the theme before, Gabe, in terms of having a themed approach. I think themed approaches are probably not going to be used as much generically. They might be used for specific companies. We're probably going to see a very nice, flat, shiny kind of design that people are used to in terms of what they're seeing online right now. And game-based approaches will take over traditional assessments. That's certainly what I believe. Some people don't hold that same belief or conviction, but I really believe that.
It seems to me, yeah, it seems to me like large, especially like Fortune 50 companies could afford to, invest in building a properly themed assessment tool, that may be based on your platform that would, work for them in continuity or in perpetuity. Certainly some of them have very specific ones, like L'Oreal's Reveal, I think it's called, which is like kind of a business plan competition.
Yeah, definitely.
Approach.
Yeah, so they've got one where they basically, their applicants will go through a number of different roles within L'Oreal and create different types of products. And it's kind of, again, it's in that attraction space and not at that assessment phase where we're actually selecting high potential candidates. But it'll certainly give them insight into whether that person fits that culture. For example, IKEA has a wonderful culture survey up front when you try to apply for their job. So it asks you, like, are you a person that prefers to focus on the quality of the chair, that does it feel good, or do you like the aesthetics? And you might select depending on what your preferences are. And at the end of that, you're an IKEA person or you're not, and they invite you to apply.
What's the right answer to that question at IKEA? I prefer it to be as frustrating as possible to put together. I think it's the right answer.
Why is there extra screws in this flat pack that I'm not using? What have I done wrong?
Yeah, right. You're an IKEA person if you love to turn the screw on potential customers. Okay, so Ken has been very patiently, Ken, thank you for joining us. Ken's been very patiently waiting for this question, which is, what about assessing creative types or oddballs? People, not, these like just mental capacity things, but more like creativity and openness and other characteristics that are maybe softer in the traditional sense of the word. It feels to me like a game-based environment would be ideal for those. Can you speak a little bit to, your vision for that or how you think that might be possible?
That was a question by David. I think I saw that in the chat. That's a really good question. I think one of the really tricky bits about assessing creativity is that it's not that well defined in the literature. And generally out there at the moment, assessments for creativity don't really exist, and it's hard to assess creativity because it fluctuates. It's not something you can just turn on and assess in a moment, I suppose. You might have an inspiration of creativity at 3 a.m. Or at 11, or it just might be something that comes at different times. Can we assess it? Can we look at it? We are, at the moment, just to give you a sense, when someone plays Theme Park Hero, we generate around 10,000 different data points per person in a 9-minute experience. That is a lot of lot of data. And what we're actually seeing, similar to what Richard Bartle proposed, in terms of different personas that people take on, experiences that they gravitate towards, like the killers, achievers, socialites, etc. We are seeing that there are different approaches in terms of how people play Theme Park Hero. Now, we haven't defined this in any type of psychometric way. We've started analyzing it. But there are different types of personalities, if you like. So there are people who are much more conservative in their approach. They'll take much more time to jump into the game. They'll make less errors, but they'll take longer. There are people who are open to experience. So when we validate our tools, we generally like to validate them in concert with or in conjunction with other psychometrically valid tools to find out what these things are actually measuring. And what we're starting to see, or there's hints at, there are people who are open to new experiences, generally like to jump around and see things and try out different types of methods before they commit to one. And we're already seeing that in the game. So moving forward, what we're going to try to do with our game-based assessments, things like Theme Park Hero. Number one, we're going to expand our library, so look at some of those different qualities that you mentioned. Things like emotional intelligence are certainly very important in terms of how you relate to other individuals and how you interact with them. Things around personality. So, openness to experience, which certainly is a part of creativity. Things like, extroversion, introversion, agreeableness, and all those other different types of personality characteristics. We're seeing them come through, but we're kind of in the process of analysing that. So I can't comment much further and concretely on what it is that the game's finding, but there are definite hints that different players are taking different approaches, and we can actually measure for that and provide output related to that.
That's fascinating. Can you speak briefly to what industries you found are most open to this, and where you find the most resistance?
Yeah, I mean, look, to be honest, I thought that we'd get into theme parks straight up. They're very interested in it. But we're seeing a real diverse cross-section of different types of industries that are starting to use this in their graduate and pre-employment processes. So really serious industries like banking and commerce, law, engineering, government departments, very large government departments. It's very interesting because you'd think they'd be used by tech companies, and tech companies would jump on it. But it's more of these kind of serious, if you like, industries where you think they'd be much more conservative that are using it as part of their process. And I think maybe there's a good reason for that. Maybe they're trying to attract new talent to come into those types of industries. But also maybe that's where companies have a lot more resources to dedicate to candidates in terms of trying to I suppose, compete with their competitors and stand out from the rest. Because employers are definitely using this as a branding opportunity, but it's also a very serious selection tool. So they kind of get dual benefits there.
Well, awesome. Salih Mujcic? Did I get that word? Mujcic? Okay. I feel really good about this. Salih, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's 3 o'clock in the morning in Australia. You've been very, very gracious with your time. You can follow Salih on Twitter, SALIH_MUJCIC, and Revelian at Revelian Co, REVELIANCO. You can find out more about them and check out Theme Park Hero, I guess, right there on the web. There's some cool videos to watch. So thank you, Salih. And thanks to the rest. Thank you. Thanks to the rest of you for joining us. I just want to leave you with one note if you haven't seen it already. The early access version of Gamification by Design 2, the update of my second book, the design book, the how-to book, is up on the web. You can join the early access program, see the chapters as they come out, and actually provide your feedback. And if you have really good feedback to add for the book, we're tracking all the comments and feedback, already getting a whole bunch from people. You have the chance to be listed as a contributor in the book. Here's your chance to be published if you haven't been before. And also for the best contributions to join me for a really fun event later on this year. So hopefully we'll see all of you there. Thank you very much, Salih. Thanks to the rest of you for joining us on Gamification Revolution. We'll see you all soon. In the meantime, keep having fun, everybody. Take care.